Welcome to this week's Authors Love Readers podcast, where we delve into the stories behind the stories. We're asking authors questions, some of them fun, some of them serious, and from their answers, you're going to learn things you never knew about the people who write the stories you love. My name is Patricia McLinn. I'm your host and designated question asker.
I'm Nicole Jordan, and I'm an author who loves readers.
Now, let's start the show. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Authors Love Readers podcast. Our guest this week is Nicole Jordan, and it is a delight to have her here. She is a longtime historical romance author with I don't even know how many best-selling books, but we will ask her that. But before I do, I guess we know each other through mutual friends from Georgia Romance Writers of America. I think that would be safe to say. And it's been a number of years. Maybe we won't go into exactly how many, right?
Correct. Yeah, we don't need to cover that.
Tell us how many books have you written? And they're all historical romance at this point, right?
Correct. They're all historical. I've done 32 so far in a number of different settings. Regency mostly, and lately. That was my first love, and it's been my last love. So,
what bestseller lists have you made?
New York Times, Publishers Weekly, USA Today, Walden's, back when Walden's was still in
Yes, back in those days, yeah.
I think it was my 12th book. Was it actually a Western historical that was my first New York Times bestseller? And I was, of course, anybody who works long hours for many years, when you hit that elusive goal, it's just like floating on air.
What was the title of that? Do you remember that? Can you share?
Yes, it was called The Heartbreaker.
Oh, great title.
It was set in Colorado in the 1880s, I believe. It was the second book of what was supposed to be a trilogy, and I never ended up finishing the trilogy because I ended up changing publishers, and they wanted to start with a fresh setting, and I ended up starting my reboot of Regencies at the time.
Now, does that third story that you never got to write, does that haunt you?
No, it haunts readers a lot.
Oh.
Yeah, his name was Wolf, and I for 20 years, I got questions from readers about when are you ever going to tell Wolf's story? I had it all planned. I think I even had a synopsis written, and I'm considering maybe one day, if I've got a few characters that got away, that I have reason to write stories about, but I never actually started writing chapters or anything, but I guess you could say they haunt me, but someday, maybe.
I bet the readers would love that.
I was also thinking about maybe if I ever wanted to branch into contemporaries, his ancestors, his descendants might make a good story.
Oh, yeah.
Then I could tell some way, his story through diaries or, some other means.
Oh, I love that idea. I love that. I was just talking to someone recently who is doing kind of two time periods, World War II and current day. And I love when the past echoes into the present, because it does. And it's so much part of our lives. I think that's a wonderful idea.
Well, I would first need to learn how to write contemporaries well. So something I'm toying with, is maybe branching into contemporaries at some point.
I think most writers looking at it, and perhaps most readers, would think it was harder to do historicals because it's more research intensive for everyday details and a very particular voice. But you're concerned or you're wondering if contemporaries would be more challenging?
Well, for me, they would definitely be more challenging because you have to remember I'm a dinosaur in this. In the publishing world, historical romance, I started in the mid 80s, and back when Laurie McBain and Kathleen Woodowus were so huge, and those were the readers, the authors I read and studied, and it took me 5 years to write my first book and rewrite it, and then finally sell it. So it was all self-taught. because I had no experience writing whatsoever. My degree is in civil engineering. And I made Pampers for a living. I made diapers and Bounty and Charmin for a living. For 8 years, I worked for Procter Gamble, and I started writing as a sort of a hobby, part-time, and then I was able to quit my lucrative job and write full-time, and it still took me a year and a half after that to sell. I've had a lot of experience doing research, and nowadays, if I wanted research, I don't have to change time periods very much. I just do specific research on specific, let's say I want to have a hot air balloon scene. I'll go research hot air balloons in the Regency period, or a specific setting in England or France or even America, or something pertaining to, or somewhere in Europe. I'll research that specific period and those specific years, those specific scenes and settings and geography. I've done a lot of research so far. I guess the hardest romance I've ever had to write was a medieval, because it was set in mid 1100s, and the research wasn't that bad, but the writing of it, I had to be very careful to make it sound not anachronistic, not too contemporary, but so that people could actually read it, and the flow was there. The people, it wasn't weren't having to pick up a dictionary every 2 minutes because they spoke.
You don't want to sound like Chaucer because people can't read it or won't read it in these times.
Exactly. You don't want to sound like Chaucer, and yet you don't want to sound like rap lyrics either. And they spoke Norman French back then, so even the grammar and sentence structure, I had to put myself in a reader's shoes as well as the character's shoes. So that was the most difficult. But I've done like I said, a book in Algeria. I've done American South, American West, different Victorian. I did 2 Scottish books that were set in the 1700s, different time periods in the 1700s. To answer your question about contemporaries versus historicals, there's a contemporary voice that I love to read, like contemporary romance, but in order to stay current with the times and use the correct slang and have current issues and younger issues, so that it's not, so I don't sound like an old fogey, it's, which is, old fogey is is an old term anyway.
But as far as slang, and having written mostly contemporaries, I've only written 2 historicals so far. I still have ideas, but if you write contemporary slang, that is actually an issue because that goes away so quickly.
Right.
And that can date the book faster than anything.
True.
So you want to find enduring slang, I guess, and kind of stay away from that. And so when you're doing this research, though, you're doing it when you're in the process of writing the book. How much do you do beforehand?
Not much, because I do a lot of plotting. I'm definitely left-brained. And for my second book, I ended up trying to just start writing. And I rewrote the first chapter and maybe second chapter like 7 or 8 times. And I finally had to have a writer friend write it for me because I had worked myself into such corners. You can't do this because of this, and you can't do this because of this. And, there's so much backstory. And I was still, my second book, I didn't know how to tell backstory without boring the reader to death. And so I had created a lot of backstory. And anyway, I finally learned that in order to write a fairly fast-paced book that kept people's interest, I personally needed to plot everything out. And I really enjoy the plotting process. It's a pleasure for me to brainstorm and figure out plots and know where I'm going.
I had a tangent actually off of something you said earlier about having a background in engineering, and also you said you're very left brain. Do you think you became an engineer because of that left brain, or did the engineering spark it and or cement it? And then from that, what benefits does that bring to you in writing, and what drawbacks might you have in writing with that kind of bend or approach?
I've always loved romance, specifically Regency romance and Georgian romance. My mother was reading Pride and Prejudice and Scarlet Pimpernel to me when I remember 8 or 10 years old. So I've always, loved that time period. And then I read a lot in romance, and I wanted to major in English and minor in French. But then I would have had to teach, and I didn't want to teach, and I wanted to earn a decent living, because a lot of teachers are not paid what they're deserved. Hats off to all the teachers in the world, who inspire children to actually read. And I was always good in science and math, so I went to engineering school, and then I wanted to earn a decent living so I could afford to do it, other things if I wanted. If I tried. But yes, there were definitely drawbacks, because I had absolutely no clue how to write. I remember it was part of the women managers at P&G at our plant in South Georgia. Back then, there weren't many of us. And so we got together once a month, and we could conduct a workshop for each other. And one of the workshops was on goal setting. They came in with a list of 50 different things after food safety, family, the basic things that you're decently, well off.
Yeah. Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah. And it's basically, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? What do you want to be when you grow up? And one of the items was write a book. Well, I must have been playing around with that for about 6 months in my subconscious, So I said, well, that looks interesting. So I went out to the mall. This was South Georgia, and there was not much to do in South Georgia other than work where I was. And so went to the mall and bought a book on how to write. It was called How to Make Every Word Count by Gary Provost. Well, it was total Greek to me. I couldn't understand all what he was trying to say, because it was a little more advanced than just how to put string words together. And then 5 years later, I went back and reread that book, and I understood what he was talking about, because I had started writing longhand on a pad and paper, with pad and paper. Wow. I bought myself a correct-to-type, one of those, the correcting typewriters were just coming out, but I made so many mistakes I couldn't possibly write that way. I had bought one of the first Apple IIe computers, if you guys can remember that far back. It took me a while to learn how to write.
Well, so your engineering brain probably made you more adaptable to computers.
Possibly, but when you've got word processing software, it's not that hard to learn. I guess the biggest difference, most romance writers are more creative and more, let's see where this takes us. And I have to know where I'm going. And I want to know where I'm going. And that's one of the pleasures of writing for me, is brainstorming and daydreaming about what the story is going to be and how to make it better. And I'm a very obsessive list maker. So if I yeah, I know. People call me OCD all the time. And if I have a problem, let's say with conflict or with a character that I get a critique sometimes from my wonderful friends who read my manuscripts, my heroine isn't likable enough, or, it's not fun enough, or, they don't understand this. So I'll figure out, okay, I'll put at the top of the top of the page, okay, how do I add more emotion to it, or how do I make the heroine more likable? And then I'll go start making lists of ways to do that, and it may take me, I'll go sit off in a corner on a quiet couch, and just kind of daydream. And it may take me, several days. But ideas start springing up. I really admire the folks who can just start writing and see it where it takes them. I've got lots of author friends who write that way, and then they can explore, different characteristics. But I hate to rewrite, and I'm such a slow writer compared to a lot of people. I noticed you, Pat, that you edit so beautifully. I guess that was because you were an editor for the Washington Post for so many years, right?
Probably, yeah.
And so you know what to look for before you even write, and you already have an idea about how things need to be changed as you go along, I'll bet.
but I still make mistakes, and that comes back to one of the questions. I definitely make typo mistakes. I think I've said in the podcast before, one of the ones that I'm very conscious of is no matter that I'm intending to type the word filed, F-I-L-E-D, it'll come out field, F-I-E-L-D. And the only thing I can think is because I was a sports writer for so long. And so my fingers get started on the F-I-L and out comes field or F-I-E instead of filed.
That's funny.
I have other bad habit words. And so I would love to know what your bad habit words are. Do you know that you have some?
Oh, I use but a lot, B-U-T, I'm a lot of comparison. You present this argument and say, but this, or although this. So I do run-on sentences, and I ended up starting a sentence with but a lot, or, so I have to figure out how to say, two different options or two different characteristics without using that word a lot. I also used to use participle phrases a lot, ing words. Going to the store, she did. So I stopped. Those were in my first few books, and I realized I was doing that. So, but see, those are easy fixes to make, and I'm a terrible speller. Thank goodness for spell check. So, and hopefully you've got copy editors and your own editor who will fix those sort of things. It's so.
And sees them, because our brains fill in so much. We know what's supposed to be there, and it makes it very difficult. But we sort of slid past some getting to know you questions, and maybe making Pampers was in fact the surprising job you've held. But have you had any others?
No, that was basically it.
Okay, that's a pretty good one.
Most of my other friends think being a writer is a surprising job. So.
That's true. A lot of people don't think of it as a job or a profession either. Sometimes that causes us problems in multiple ways. People think we should give away our books. The difficulty with that is I have a dog who likes to eat. So, and grocery stores and mortgage companies and folks like that don't want to be paid in stories. They want the money. And the other thing that we run into is working at home. I often have people think you're not doing anything.
I learned very quickly to say, I'm sorry, I can't.
Good for you. And those moments when you're sitting in the corner of the couch and it looks like you're daydreaming, you are working. You are, pulling things out.
Luckily, I had the luxury of not having children. For people, writers who have children and big families and other obligations, it's much, much harder. But, this is how I started writing in the first place, is 2 hours would go by and I would think it was 10 minutes because I was so obsessed. And I was working 60 hours a week, most of the time with P&G. But I devoted, 8 hours a day on Sundays. That was my writing time. And it was just so liberating. And I was just so passionate about it. And I think that's what kept me going all those years.
That's terrific. Now, would you consider, you talked about your mom reading Pride and Prejudice and the Scarlet Pimpernel, which I've always thought the Scarlet Pimpernel had perhaps the best romantic conflict ever.
It's pretty good when you think your wife is accused of treason.
Yeah, that you can't trust your wife, or it's going to cost people's lives. The risk is that people will be killed. So I always love that story. But were those the first ones that really said to you, "Oh yeah, I love story," or did you have even earlier ones?
No, those were that was probably 8 years old. I remember doing a skit in 4th grade about the Scarlet Pimpernel. I pretended to be one of the guards, and the Scarlet Pimpernel got through my checkpoints. I did it. I've used my mom helped me present that skit. We had to do something from a book. And I remember doing 10th grade English class. I was in an honors English class, which was a very, very difficult class. And we had to do a book report. And I did I did mine on Pride and Prejudice. And boy, was my teacher wonderful. I credit her with giving me some of the skills that it takes to be a writer. I mean, it's grammar, it was sentence structure, essays. We had to write an essay every week. We had to do vocabulary lists, 20 words, and their definitions from memory, not even her telling us what the words were. Correct spelling, definitions, everything. So it was really a slave driver, but it really paid off many years later.
Did you ever encounter stories in those before you started writing where you loved the story, but the ending wasn't quite right, and you either in your head or actually rewrote it?
I never had much time to read when I was working, making diapers. And I never read a whole lot of literature other than what we were required to read in school. And in engineering school, I took 2 quarters of English as an elective and a couple of languages as an elective, because just as a break from, math and science. But no, I can't say that. I was not really a storyteller ever. Most people say they were always a storyteller. I never was. In fact, the only thing I remember writing, I wrote a poem in like 5th grade, which I thought was kind of cute. And the only other fiction I wrote was a short story my senior year in high school, I believe, and my mother had to put the ending on it because I just kind of left it there. No, but I do remember staying up. I remember reading Laurie McBain's Tears of Gold, and the sexual tension and the conflict between that, where the hero and heroine were at odds. It was another one of these. The hero thought the heroine was awful and had betrayed, her. Can't even remember what the story is now, but it had something to do with the gold rush out west, San Francisco. But I remember staying up all night, and that was saying, it was just like, okay, this is what I love to read. And so I think instead of writing, it's reading that got me interested in becoming a writer. It wasn't writing anything, because I never wrote anything much until I actually started my first novel.
I think when we read a lot, we internalize a lot of the rhythms of writing, and it doesn't always come out 100%, but you have a feeling of the pace and the rhythm, and something's working or it's not working. I think nothing can replace what you gain from doing a lot of that reading.
Yeah, I do remember, now that you think about it, I do remember there was, I can't even remember the name of the book now. It's very famous, about a heroine who it was like during the Black Plague, the Black Death in England, and she did everything in the world for this hero, and then she didn't get him in the end. He married some little wimp,
oh no,
his social status, and she went off to America, and it was almost like I'm ready for a new day. Kind of like, I did not like the Scarlet O'Hara. I did not like Gone with the Wind ending either. Now that I think about it, I didn't like those. But when the heroine has worked so hard and deserves the hero, I think there needs to be a happy ending.
Well, maybe she deserved better than him, though, huh? Especially the one you're talking about. I know Rhett Butler. It's hard to think somebody.
Yeah, I would have gladly put a new ending on that one and on Gone with. I mean, it's sacrilegious to say I want to rewrite Gone with the Wind's ending. Is it?
You're not the first one. Now, I'm curious about working as an engineer. What did your fellow engineers think when you started publishing books?
They were all very supportive of it.
That's terrific.
I know, it was great. In fact, 2 of my best critiquers were fellow women managers, at the very beginning. And my sister-in-law at the time was very supportive. And they were I would write, longhand. They'd read a chapter and they'd say, "Oh, this is really good. Do a little bit more of this, take out a little bit of this." It was total garbage. But it gave me the inspiration, it gave me the motivation to keep going. Oh. I think if anybody who knew anything had actually critiqued it, I would have been, ground into dust and, quit writing, hung up my pencil and paper.
I think I worked with mostly guys, not entirely,
Oh
but
yeah, I guess you
mostly
did.
guys working in the sports department. And when I sold my first book and had my first book signing, it was in Arlington, Virginia, just outside of DC, and a bunch of my coworkers came. And I will never forget the reaction of the clerk at Walden Books. She was like, "You sold 10 books to guys." and
Oh, fun.
and then their reaction, because we all worked that night and they were reading sections aloud and they were going, "Holy moly!" and reading parts aloud to each other and to me, I guess. I knew what it said. Thank you very much, guys.
Well, especially if you write spicy romances like I do, then you get people who want to take the love scenes out of context. But yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So, did you have things earlier in your life that you used to get tied up in a knot about, and as you've gone along with life, now you go, who cares?
Well, yeah, when my father-in-law passed away with cancer, from cancer,
Oh,
some years ago, it was like after that, it was like, okay, it's not cancer. You can deal with this. Whatever it is, it's not cancer. One of my dear friends recently has started deteriorating from Alzheimer's. And okay, so now I've amended that to it's not cancer and it's not Alzheimer's. You can sure deal with it. So yeah, I guess you could say there were. Yeah, I guess it's don't sweat the small stuff.
right, right. And time tends to make the small stuff smaller, doesn't it?
And I'm always so obsessive and such a perfectionist. It's just I want everything to go right, especially if I spend a lot of time and money and put a lot of effort into it. But if it doesn't happen, it's I've had to learn to go with the flow more, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm. And have you found benefits from doing that?
It's a lot less stress.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Now, that's okay. So those are sort of sayings that you've created for yourself. Do you have any other sayings, whether, just that you like to live by, whether it came from your parents or from someplace else in the passage of time?
Yeah, the last few years, my mom sent me a quote that was on her computer for seniors that I had bought her so I could remote it, access it remotely, and so she could have something simple to get email and internet and her pictures.
Well, that's terrific.
And on the home screen, it comes up with it has a daily quote. Well, she sent that to me when I was going through a little bit of a rough period, and she said, life is a grindstone. Whether it grinds you down or polishes you up depends on what you are made of."
Ooh.
I actually had that. I had a graphic designer. I love that. So I had a graphic designer put a background and some little ivy around the top and bottom, and then I got it framed. It's hanging in my kitchen because that is so true. It's you learn your worth when you face hard times, and there's so many people who face hard times, and it's just a reminder that hang in there, I guess.
Yeah. That's so true too with characters, that who they really are shows when somebody, naming no names, puts them in deep trouble and gives them difficulties to overcome.
Somebody named Pat, huh?
Not me. I'm pretty easy on them. I have a couple friends. Oh my goodness, their characters suffer. All right, mine suffer a little bit, but
The thing is, you have to remember with fiction is that it'd be you wouldn't be able to have any readers at all because it'd be so boring. The conflict is what makes fiction, but I sure wouldn't want to go through a lot of the conflict I put my characters through, would you?
no, absolutely not. And I think one of the things we talk about that as writers a lot, and sometimes I think readers and some aspiring writers also take it to mean nastiness to each other or squabbling or arguing, and that's not that, like a Scarlet Pimpernel, that it is something very deep where something is at stake, and you you both are really drawn to this person, and you're terrified that if you let those emotions go, this horrible thing will happen. That's conflict.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, to me, conflict in the general sense is anything that stands in the way of your goals. You have a goal, an obstacle, and what you do to overcome that goal is, kind of shows your character, is what you said. But in terms of romantic conflict, they both got to have, to me, they both need to want different things, or there's got to be some reason why they don't get together. Otherwise, why write a romance?
Yeah.
I guess you were asking me, how I started as a writer. The other thing I did that was really super, super helpful is I bought a copy of Dwight Swain's Techniques of the Selling Writer, and it's all about scene and sequel and cause and effect. But see, that worked so well for me because I'm so left-brained. I'm so much of a plotter, and it starts out the book about talking about why readers read fiction, and if you can hook readers into the emotion of whatever's going on, then you've got them hooked, and they'll want to keep turning the pages. And then you've got to give them a reason to keep reading. So that was my Bible for many years. Another one that I thought was really great, years later, when I had been writing for 20 years, was writing the breakout novel.
Donald Maass.
Yes. That was really helpful to me.
I can read those books and I recognize it, but I cannot, then I have to shut them aside when I'm actually writing. I can apply them after I have a complete draft, but I can't have them interfering with me.
Yeah, but see, you've got a background in writing. Your whole education, your whole work experience. You have to remember, I never wrote anything except for boring reports.
You mentioned about why people read, and I'm so fascinated by the brain studies that are coming out now that show that a lot of times people, the same parts of the brain that are engaged by actively living something are also engaged by reading about the experience. And I'm like, hot dog, I knew it. I knew it. And I think it explains a lot, both in why some of us are so interested in reading and why people who are widely read often have more curiosity. Curiosity leads you to read, but it also reading leads you to more curiosity and wanting to expand your horizons, even if you're doing it by sitting in your comfy chair. There was a sign in my library that here in Northern Kentucky that said something about, reading is the best way to travel without leaving your chair. And I thought, yeah, I love that.
Well, I wrote a whole series of historical romances set off the coast of Spain in a fictional island that I patterned after Mallorca and Menorca, and never got to go visit until after I'd written all 4 books. Yeah, but it's, exactly. You can see so much of the world,
So I'm jumping around here, but I have my strange little desert island that you're going to be stuck on forevermore. And yet this island will let you play a movie, except only 3 movies. You can only play 3 movies over and over and over. Which movies are you going to select?
Oh, well, the A&E version of Pride and Prejudice with Colin Firth. And that is 6 hours long. Does that count as only one movie?
I tell you, so many authors have cheated at this.
Yeah.
I'm letting that go. Yes. Okay.
I've got a few other favorites that are much less well known. Something that came out and didn't have very wide distribution. It's called Cake, as in the dessert. And it's just a really fun story. Well, it's not even just fun, but it's a damaged heroine who learns to love again and let go of her past. And Another one I really like is it's a Hallmark movie, The 12 Dates of Christmas. It's a heroine who has to relive the same day over and over again until she finally figures out what she's doing wrong and falls in love with the hero after all, instead of screwing up the relationship all the time. First of all, she disses him completely, and writes him off and then ticks him off. And, so each day she gets a little smarter.
So sort of a romantic Groundhog Day.
Yes, exactly.
So I never considered that particularly romantic, but...
No, normally I wouldn't, but it's just her interaction with the hero is so great. It's Paul Michael Glacier or Michael Paul Glacier, whatever. How are you?
Yeah. Well, and I like to see if there's a connection among the three that an author picks, and where I can kind of see a connection there are second chances.
Yeah,
or 12 chances with the last one.
But I also like, Pride and Prejudice for me, and my first book and many of my other books have had heroes that are, kind of rakish, kind of, the never going to fall in love kind of story, and the heroine changes his mind, throughout the book, figures out, she makes him fall in love, basically. So I love that kind of theme is one of my very favorites. For some reason, he's not emotionally susceptible to falling in love. And she, for whatever reason, whatever she does, whatever action she takes and whatever happens in the book, makes him fall in love with her. I love those kind of stories.
With having written books in these different places and different periods, I'm still going to ask you one of my weird little questions, just to see what you say. If your writing were a color, what color would it be?
Probably like a burgundy or a dark crimson, because I used to write pretty emotional, I won't say dark books, but they were a lot. Back when I started writing, you have to remember that was the days of Rosemary Rogers, where, the heroine got carted off and raped and pillaged by a bunch of different guys, so, and I never did care for that kind of story. But all of the other ones that I fell in love with were very serious and very emotional and very long and very detailed and very complex. And so that's where I got my training. I have since, in the past 10 years, I've since lightened up significantly, but I still have to have that emotional connection, the emotional depth and the emotional conflict. It doesn't mean that I don't appreciate reading other stories, but for writing, I've got to have something at stake for the hero and heroine.
And that's interesting because what I was wondering, and I think your answer is yes, that no matter where the story is set or when it is set, it still has that sort of feel that comes out in that sort of color.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so, because, maybe some contemporaries, some chick lit books might be pink or, pale blue to think of light and pretty, or fluffy, but my books have never been fluffy. And I've been trying to lighten up and find more humor and more, just not so dark, so that readers, especially after 9/11, for example, I, along with many other readers, wanted to read something lighter for escape.
Mm-hmm. Now, you talked about that you plan your stories, so you're outlining it. Is that the part of the process you like the best? How do you feel about when you sit down to write, the sentences and paragraphs that bring life to that outline? And so which part of the process do you like better, and how do you approach these different parts?
Well, what I usually do, the way I start a book, is I've got some characters in mind.
Wait, let me stop you there, because one of the readers asks where our story ideas come from. So where do those characters come from to start? And so I'm backing you up a couple steps before you tell the rest of us.
Yeah, my process is so OCD. I start with a scene somewhere in the book, and then I figure out how they got to that point and where it goes afterwards. And then I brainstorm ad nauseum for months in advance while I'm still working on the previous book, still writing or doing copy edits or whatever for the previous book, I'll be, figuring out what the emotional conflict is, why they should get together, what their characteristics are, their flaws and their admirable traits. When I finally am ready, I'll start working on the first chapter, and I go from page 1 all the way to page, the end. And I know most other romance writers that I know will write scenes and then stitch them together. I can't do that. So I might have a few, I might write a few pages and I say, no, that belongs later on. Or I might write a few pages and I say, no, that belongs in another book or something like that. But I'm ABC. You start at point A and you work your way all the way to Z.
So what do you do with those few pages that you think belong somewhere else?
I save them in a file.
Okay.
It was kind of funny. One of my my second editor that I ever had, she was a frustrated Regency writer, and she told me that I could not use, let's see, what was it? It was for my third book. It was set in the Caribbean in 1818, and I could not use the word décolletage, which means neckline. It was the French word for neckline because it did not come into common usage until 1820, and, 2 years later. And of course, anybody knows if, Webster's dictionary starts compiling words 50 years in advance. And when they finally decide it belongs in the dictionary, it's because it's been in common usage for many years. And so, that was just, and she said, but that was a learning experience because what she said was save it for another book. So even though, that was not a particularly, I objected to being restricted that way in that book, it was a learning because I started saving words that I really liked. Instead of trying to figure out ways to use it in this book, I said, okay, I can use it. And that was actually liberating. So and I had editors that would make me cut whole scenes or whole chapters, and I would just save them in a file and say, okay, I would sometimes print them out, and say, okay, some day in the future, 20 years from now, I may use it. And I've used a lot of them, actually, some way, shape, or fashion, because I'm so married to my words. Unlike you, who writes quickly, I take forever to write and compose because I always have this editor sitting on my shoulder saying, oh, well, readers would object to that, or it's too much slang, it's too contemporary a word, that isn't perfect sentence structure, instead of just writing with, going with flow, which a lot of other people do. So
I have words that I love. I have been known to order chimichangas just because I like the word.
No, I have to admit, I have not gone that far.
Isn't that a fun word, though? Chimichangas.
Yes, that is true.
Yeah. So what is your favorite part of the process, though? I guess I'm still getting back to the writing versus the plotting and the outlining. Do you have this one part?
Yes.
Do you look forward more to one part than the other, or do they feed your soul in different ways?
No, the actual writing process for me is just sit down in front, put your tush in the chair and write, for many hours a day. And you keep going, you keep going. So the fun part of writing for me is the brainstorming and the daydreaming. I guess you'd call it daydreaming because you can see all kinds of possibilities. And there are sometimes I was getting better at it, but there are so many times when you envision how something's going to turn out and it doesn't quite turn out the way you hope. It's not as good, or, can't make it work, but when I first started out, I could see all kinds of possibilities, and I wasn't skilled enough to bring them to fruition, or it took forever to make them happen. So I'm getting better at that, but still the daydreaming part is the fun part for me. And when you were asking about how I get my ideas, I write in series. And I learned a few series ago that if you're going to write a series, you need to figure out what the other characters and other books are going to be about before you write yourself into a corner and it gets published. So I've got a couple of characters that I sent off to different places, or I started and ended up having to change their names. And, it's not easy to figure out a 5-book series years in advance.
Yeah.
As you probably know.
Let's skip to some questions here from readers. And one wants to know if you have a favorite place to write and why. Does it have an inspirational view?
No, inspirational view, once I actually am writing, interferes with putting words on the page. So I've got a huge, gigantic, gorgeous, custom-made desk with a hutch, and I've got 2 laptop computers with 1 monitor, keyboard, and wireless mouse. But if I want to be creative, I go off in a comfortable chair or a couch with a pad and pencil and just start making lists. So those are my 2 favorite places to write. I mean, mm-hmm. I don't call sitting at my desk all that much of a favorite place. But if I want to produce anything, I've got to do it.
It's interesting how we're sort of divided, the authors. It seems like some people really need that inspirational view, and some people need the lack of distraction. Both of those show up a lot.
I totally need the lack of distraction, but I also need to let my subconscious work. So, in the middle of the night, if I wake up, if I'm really into a book, I've got a pad and pencil beside my bed, and I'll write by an alarm clock, so I don't disturb my husband. So, and he said, that's fine, except you can't erase because it shakes the bed and then wakes up. I also used to take walks. Because that's a really great way to let your subconscious work, or just mull it over for a couple of days. Sometimes it helps.
Do you miss the characters when you finish a book?
Oh, yeah.
So then I'm wondering, is that what makes you then write another book in the series?
No, it's because I've always written series, but I didn't know I was writing series because some character showed up in my first book, and I ended up, my second book was actually the prequel to my first book.
Oh.
Because there were some characters that I really liked so much, but they had to have their story before my first book. So it was just kind of, learning seat of my pants. And a lot of the other single, what I would call stray books or single title books had connections. And then I started getting questions from readers is, why don't you write a story about, about this guy or this heroine? And so then I started deliberately figuring out how I would write a trilogy. For example, my Rocky Mountain trilogy, I told you I wrote the first 2 books in that trilogy and never got around to the 3rd book because I changed publishers. So it taught me that, as a reader, I love reading about characters that I've met. And there's a knack for creating secondary characters that readers want to read about. It took me a while to figure that out, but now I try to figure out what characters I want to write about in the future so I can slip that into the current book so that readers are going to want to read about it and I'm going to want to write about it. When I started my first book, I ended up having some friends of the heroine or the hero, I can't remember which, and I ended up, for my second book, I wrote the prequel to the first book as my second book. And then in later books, I started having characters that were somehow related to the hero or heroine, and I kept getting questions from readers about what happened to them. Can you tell their story? And then I started figuring out, I would like to know what happened to those people too. So I started purposely designing series. And for my Rocky Mountain trilogy, I told you I wrote the first couple of books of that and then never finished the 3rd book because I changed publishers. I purposely planned that out. And ever since then, I've developed characters. I've developed series thinking about how I wanted to proceed how I wanted the books to play out in the future.
But I love that you, in fact, wrote a series out of order. I'm going to hold that over your head. See?
I was an engineer. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just trying to learn to write. I was a total novice. So I wrote the characters. I guess what it boils down to is I wrote the characters that I loved, and I wanted to find out more about their story. I figured if I wanted to find out more about their stories, readers might too. But at the time, so many readers that I knew were writing books to fit the mold. Well, I was one of those. I was the tortoise, and I just kept writing books that I wanted to read as opposed to writing what I thought would sell. And it took me a lot longer, and, maybe a year per book, sometimes more. I'm still around. And a lot of the people the writers that started with me, they were a flash in the pan, and they wrote to a trend. And I just tried to write the emotional stories that had a lot of conflict with a wonderful happy ending and strong characters who overcome their own obstacles, because that's what appealed to me.
When I've taught writing, I often say that if you write a book that you like, that is the only way that you are guaranteed that at least one person will like the book. If you don't want to read it, you can have nobody liking the book. So I always figure, okay, I'm going to entertain myself first, and then we'll see what happens from there. So I'm with you 100% on that.
Yeah, that's so true.
Of all your books, if someone has not read any of your books, can you think of one that's a good introduction, a good entry point?
I wrote The Courtship Wars. Turned out to be 6 books. And the first book of that series was probably the one I would recommend because it has a little bit, I won't say lighter flavor, but it's not as dark. It's set in Regency period, so it's my true love, and it's a couple of sisters, 3 sisters that start the trilogy, and then the last 3 books are some of their friends and relatives.
So The Courtship Wars is the name of the series.
Correct. And
what's the title? What's the first title?
The name of the book is To Pleasure a Lady. Okay. It's a spicy historical romance, Regency set book, and it doesn't have a lot of Wellington and Napoleon and battles and a lot of serious conflict. It's not the Rosemary Rogers or even Kathleen Woodiwas kind of stories that, back from the 80s where I grew up.
So now we get to go to my very favorite part, the rapid fire either ors. Binge watch or make the watching last as long as possible?
It depends. I guess.
No,
it depends.
Either or.
Example, I just started watching Jack Ryan on Amazon. It's a Tom Clancy. It's a different character. Different actor. And so I'm going to binge watch that. But some of the others I want to draw out as long as possible and I save on my DVR. It's terrible how much stuff I've got on my DVR, and I rewatch it. If I love it, I rewatch it, just like books. I'll reread books over and over again if I really love them.
I think you are the first person who has not made it through a single question. Just doing either or. Most of them break somewhere along the line, but I think you may be the first one on the first question.
Okay, sorry. Okay. I guess I would prefer to draw it out as long as possible.
Okay, coffee or tea?
Tea, definitely.
Cat or dog?
Dog.
Hot air balloon or train trip?
Train trip.
Daisies or roses?
Roses.
Appetizer or dessert?
Appetizer.
I'm still going to give you dessert, so ice cream or cake?
Okay, if I got to answer, probably cake.
Would you rather not have either?
No, I'd rather both, but...
Oh, okay. That makes much more sense. Heels or slippers?
Oh, definitely slippers.
Hiking boots or cowboy boots?
Hiking boots.
Pickup or sports car?
Can I do an SUV?
No.
Probably pickup.
House decorating or gardening?
Oh, definitely house decorating.
Paint or wallpaper?
Paint.
Paper plates or best china?
Paper plates.
Day or night?
I'll say day, even though I'm a night person, a frustrated night person, I'll say day.
Opera or show tunes?
Oh, show tunes by far.
Winter Olympics or Summer Olympics?
Summer by far.
Mustard or ketchup?
Mustard.
Sailboat or motorboat?
Sailboat.
Nail polish or bare nails?
Bare nails.
Leggings or sweats?
Sweats.
Spring or fall?
Spring.
Cruise or trekking vacation?
I like both, but I guess I'll go with trek because it's more exercise.
Okay, last one. Grab the best first or save the best for last?
Probably save the best for last.
That's terrific. Thank you so much, Nicole. Really appreciated your coming on, and I know the listeners will enjoy it. And to all the listeners out there, hope you have a great week of happy reading, and come back and join us next week for the next edition of Authors Love Readers podcast. That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye.